Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the clean-up after the storm. People in the borders assess the damage caused by the weekend's flooding.
We stand here and cry right in front of you right now, but you have to get on. We're still living, we're still alive, and there's a lot of people in the same situation.
Nicola Sturgeon reshuffles her cabinet, making Kate Forbes the new Finance Secretary to replace Derek Mackay. 5 years after the Glasgow bin lorry tragedy, we look at the technology which could prevent it happening again. And with the start of the women's football season just days away, we assess how big the game has become in Scotland. Good evening. The clean-up is continuing in the borders this evening after flooding caused by Storm Dennis. The First Minister has visited Hawick to meet people affected by the severe weather and flooding and thanked the local authority, emergency services and responders. Last week the town was also hit by Storm Ciara. Our reporter Stephen Godden has spent the day with some of those worst affected.
A filthy, dispiriting task for families caught up in the worst of the weekend flooding, clearing out possessions damaged beyond repair.
Yeah, well look at that. If I put my foot there, look, the water's moving.
Saturday was the third time Barbara Johnson's been flooded out of her home near Hawick, finding herself marooned inside as the water arrived before the official flood warning.
And the water was coming down the corridor like that and spilling into each room, and then it was coming in the front door, and I'm sort of putting all those towels down to try and save it, you know.
This was the scene next door.
I've had to put all these posts in behind the old railway line.
Defences Mick Murphy had built and paid for himself were powerless to prevent the torrent coming from all sides.
And we'll have to probably move out for same as last time, 4 months, 5 months.
How do you feel about this situation you're in?
I could stand here and cry right in front of you right now, but you have to get on. We're still living, we're still alive, and there's a lot of people in the same situation.
With rivers reaching record levels in some parts of the borders, flooded residents took refuge where they could. In Newcastleton, 80 homes were affected. A couple rescued from their car as the water rose today thanked the fire service for saving their lives.
Once again, this is the River Teviot, as you'll.
The situation brought the First Minister to Hawick this afternoon. Nicola Sturgeon meeting people living on the banks of the River Teviot, escorted by members of the town's volunteer flood group.
It just hammers at home how desperate we are, communities like this, to be protected. We need to tame these two rivers. They need taming. If we don't tame them, then people's livelihoods and people's homes are just going to be ruined continuously.
Hawick's multi-million-pound flood protection scheme is due for completion in 2022. Welcome, say locals, but a long way off for communities cleaning up once again.
And Stephen is in Hawick for us tonight. Stephen, you've spent the day there and people now questioning how they can be better protected in the future.
Yeah, that's right, Laura. This is the second weekend in a row that people in Hawick and further afield in the borders have been counting the cost of the weather. Behind the bridge, just behind me there, is the guest house that partially collapsed into the water during Storm Ciara last weekend, and I think that really has focused people's minds when it comes to this flood protection scheme. Now, the First Minister was talking about that when she was down on her visit today. She said that the extreme weather underlines the importance of these schemes, and that while councils will take the lead, the Scottish Government will look to support them with funding. But for other vulnerable communities at risk of flooding, it's perhaps not that straightforward. The reality is that these schemes are very expensive. They take a lot of time. The scheme here in Hawick was first conceived back in 2005. So the complexities are very much there, and underlined by the situation here today. Those people that I was speaking to in the report, their concern is that they're in an area that isn't covered by this flood scheme, so that while the town might be protected when it's finished, their worry is that the problems simply move upstream and they have more difficulties rather than fewer problems because it's been built. So not an altogether straightforward picture. For now, though, that is for the future. For now, people are looking at the present and what the weather might have in store for them, keeping an eye on that forecast because they've had so many problems last week, this week, and wondering what might be coming.
Indeed, thanks, Stephen. Nicola Sturgeon has reshuffled her cabinet and appointed Kate Forbes as Finance Secretary following the resignation of Derek Mackay. The 29-year-old became the first woman to set out a budget at Holyrood or Westminster earlier this month. Fiona Hislop takes on extra responsibility for the economy, while Jenny Gilruth has joined the government as Europe Minister. With more details, here's our political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes.
Stepping up to accept a big promotion, Kate Forbes arrived at Bute House this morning to become Scotland's new Finance Secretary. In a mini reshuffle of cabinet, Fiona Hislop adds economy and fair work to her culture brief, and backbencher Jenny Gilruth joins government as Europe Minister. These changes to the ministerial lineup were prompted by Derek Mackay's resignation earlier this month.
These are not the circumstances in which I would have wanted to be making changes to the Cabinet and the Government, but that doesn't change the fact that these are very positive and very strong appointments, and I think will underline the key aspects of the Scottish Government's agenda and the priorities that we're driving forward.
And I declare that Kate Forbes has been duly elected a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Skye,
elected in 2016 to represent Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch constituency, Kate Forbes was born in Dingwall, raised in Glasgow and India and studied at Cambridge. As a backbencher, she's championed the Gaelic language
Hamisha, Kate, Elisach, Orabish,
and issues affecting rural communities. The former accountant became Public Finance Minister in 2018, then impressed many when she stepped in to deliver the budget in Mr Mackay's place. Now promoted to Cabinet before turning 30, she's one of the SNP's fastest rising stars.
Now she's got a challenge ahead of her, of course, to steward the Scottish Government's budget through Parliament over the next few weeks. But she is an incredible talent. She's young. She's the first woman to hold the job of Finance Secretary in the Scottish Government. But I believe very strongly that it's important to allow new talent to flourish, and she's been given a big responsibility, but it's one that I think she will seize with both hands and make an excellent job of.
Meanwhile, Mr Mackay is not expected to return to Holyrood this week, where he would sit as an independent MSP. He's understood to be undergoing medical assessment after a newspaper revealed he sent hundreds of messages to a 16-year-old schoolboy. Police Scotland say they've not received a criminal complaint and continue to assess available information. In Nicola Sturgeon's now fully gender-balanced government, there are also extra responsibilities for Cabinet Secretaries Michael Russell and Fergus Ewing, while Ben McPherson takes on Miss Forbes' old job as Public Finance Minister. The appointments of Miss Forbes and Miss Gilruth will be confirmed in a vote by MSPs tomorrow. Lindsay Bewes, Reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Well, as you can see, our political editor Brian Taylor is here now. Brian, not a lot of movement in this reshuffle. That a surprise?
No, maximum crisis, deliberately minimalist and cautious response. Nicola Sturgeon determined to project an air of stability at a period when the Scottish Government has been beset by trauma and turbulence. Not just Derek Mackay, but controversies over education health policy, controversies over the question of whether there should be and when there should be a further independence referendum. Nicola Sturgeon wants to steady the ship, and so two things. Just put Kate Forbes into that position. Nobody loses a job today, nobody demoted, nobody sacked. But at the same time, narrowing her remit so that it's focusing purely on finance, on those tax and spending plans that she has to get through Holyrood, the economy remit going elsewhere.
Yeah, and of course Kate Forbes delivered that budget earlier in the month. Do you think that's a sign that she has impressed since taking over since Derek Mackay quit?
She did exceptionally well presenting the budget. Remember, it wasn't her budget. She contributed to it, but it was his budget. And with only a matter of hours, she had to present it to Parliament and defend it before Parliament. She did very well. She was noticed prior to that, but she did exceptionally well on that day. She impressed Nicola Sturgeon, good person to impress when that's the boss, but she now has to impress Parliament. Starting tomorrow, she's giving evidence to subject committees on that tax and spending plan, £40 billion in total of tax and spending, and she needs to persuade another party in Holyrood to back that plan because, of course, the SNP lack a majority, a huge task.
OK, so do you think then this means that Kate Forbes is being positioned as a future leader?
Derek Mackay was being positioned as a future leader until he's suddenly no longer a minister or indeed a member of the SNP. That's the dreadful irony that surrounds it. Yes, indeed. Kate Forbes has moved well up the pecking. She's already been tipped as a possible future one. She's moved well up the pecking order as a consequence of this. If there is to be a vacancy, which I'm sure the First Minister would wish to stress, there isn't.
Well, indeed. Thank you very much, Brian. A retired police inspector accused of murdering his wife in Aberdeen has told a trial her death was an accident. Keith Farquharson, who's 60, insisted 56-year-old Alice passed away following a struggle in bed after she asked if he loved her and then hit him. Jurors heard that a guilty plea to a reduced charge of culpable homicide from Mr Farquharson, who denies murder, had previously been rejected. He admitted having affairs with 3 women. The trial at the High Court in Glasgow continues. A man accused of murdering an 83-year-old man and attempting to murder 2 70-year-olds at Woods in Murray is unfit to stand trial. Frank Kinnis died after an incident at Birkenhill Woods near New Elgin. Maurice Smith and his wife Jan were also injured. David Johnson, who's 35, was not present at the High Court in Glasgow when the case was called. He's currently detained at the State Hospital. An examination of facts will take place in July. A man's died after falling in Glen Nevis yesterday. The 42-year-old was on the path for Stow Ban. A search was mounted by Lochaber Mountain Rescue Team, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, Weston Bartonshire Council is the first in the UK to introduce innovative safety technology to stop its bin lorries if the driver loses control. The technology allows crew members or other passengers to slow down safely and stop the vehicle in an emergency situation. Katrina Renton has more.
This bin lorry weighs 26 tonnes when it's full, but with the pull of a lever, it can be brought to a halt within seconds.
Brake comes on. If I became unconscious and my foot was jammed onto the accelerator, it still wouldn't move. It won't budge.
Every crew member that works here has been trained to use the safety device. So if Joe did get into trouble while he was driving, anyone on board would be able to bring the lorry quickly and safely to a halt.
This comes against the backdrop of the bin lorry crash in Glasgow at Christmas time in 2014. 6 people were killed, many others were injured. Following the fatal accident inquiry into the crash, councils were advised to train crew members about steering and braking controls and, where practical, to get advanced emergency braking systems fitted to their large trucks. It's hoped this new system can go even further.
Yeah, a lot of local authorities have been asking us about the system. They're thinking about implementing it on their vehicles as well. But we do think we have a piece of equipment now that can stop a lot of the tragedies from happening.
Weston Bartonshire Council has had the new system fitted to all 21 lorries in its fleet. It's particularly important to the local authority.
The Glasgow incident did claim the lives of 3 of our residents, so it is really important for us to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure both our refuse collectors and our residents are as safe as possible.
The type of work we do, we're in built-up areas, we're going into cul-de-sacs, we do a lot of schools, and there's kids everywhere, there's pedestrians everywhere, and it's really tight, and you've got to really be aware, the drivers especially, have got to be really aware of what's actually going on around them. But this gives you a wee bit more confidence that if something did happen, then you could be able to, somebody would be able to control the vehicle in an emergency situation.
Katrina Renton, reporting Scotland, Clydebank.
You're watching Reporting Scotland, a reminder of tonight's top story. The clean-up is continuing in the Borders after the flooding caused by Storm Dennis. And still to come, Scotland aim to get their Six Nations back on track in Rome. Now, with only days to go until the women's football season gets underway in Scotland, clubs from around the country have been gathering at the National Stadium to look ahead to the competition. The Glasgow City head coach, Scott Booth, says his side have to approach the next few months with confidence as they look to challenge for their 14th league title in a row. City are expected to come up against stiff competition, though, from the likes of Rangers and Celtic, whose women's teams are now professional. Heather Dewar reports.
It's the top flight, but not as we know it. While some of the faces here may look familiar, others are playing in the league for the very first time.
I think it's a really exciting time to come into the club with all the new investments and becoming professional and stuff like that. So.
Why did you want to come to Scotland?
I don't know, I just wanted to try something new. And the league here is big, and in Iceland we know about Rangers and Celtic and stuff, so I was excited to try that out.
It's not just the players that have changed, the feel of the league is different too, with Hearts promoted to SWPL1 and both Rangers and Celtic going professional.
Well, traditionally Glasgow City have been the ones to watch in this league. They've been the main challengers, they've dominated, they've won the last 13 league titles in a row. But with Rangers and Celtic now becoming mainly professional, what will that mean for Glasgow City? How will they cope and how will they bring home more of these in 2020?
There's a fear of not winning as the thing that drives you on the most, I think, at times. You know, that it's good to have that fear because it's really vital that you don't become complacent. And I think that's, again, a thing that Glasgow City as a club have not done, and we will continue to not do that, not get complacent.
Well, it all bodes for a pretty exciting season ahead, which some are saying is simply too close to call.
I think it is going to be a really exciting season because you've got teams who are stepping up. Celtic and Rangers were 3rd and 4th last year, with Hibs 2nd. What's that going to look like? Lots of good signings in there. It's very difficult to call this season.
It all makes for an intriguing time in the women's game, and for City a challenge to maintain that dominance and keep hold of the players who help secure their place at the top.
We've always worked really hard in the background to make sure that we keep our best players, that we have the best team, and I think that doesn't change. I think it is very good for the women's game that there's a lot of talk about it. I think it's very good that there are other clubs taking the game seriously now.
A good start in this league could be vital. Heather Dewar, reporting Scotland.
Now, awaiting news from your doctor can be an anxious time, but if you're blind or partially sighted, there can be further worry if you have to rely on friends or family to read your confidential medical information first. A leading charity says patient confidentiality is being breached. It comes nearly a decade on from changes to the law which gave people the right to receive patient information in a format which meets their needs. Ian Hamilton reports.
Ken Reid, who is blind, is checking out some accessible technology.
So it's a keyboard with big letters.
In the last 20 years, there's been a revolution the way in which visually impaired people access information. Yet people like Ken are still relying on friends and family to read on their behalf potentially sensitive information from the NHS. And it could be solved by something as simple as an email or large print.
So I have to get letters, I then have to give them to somebody else to read to me, so they immediately know what's happening in my health, with my health. It could be something extremely traumatic, it could even be something life-threatening. Thankfully it hasn't been for me, but for others it may be. It could be something that's that they really don't want their nearest and dearest to know anything about, and yet the only way they can access it is by giving it to somebody to read aloud to them. And that's really, in this day and age, is just totally unacceptable.
In Glasgow today, RNIB Scotland launched a report highlighting the challenges that blind people face accessing information from the NHS. How big an issue is this for visually impaired people in Scotland?
It's a big issue. It's a national issue. As stated within the report, the Patients' Rights Scotland Act 2011 states that people should receive accessible documents. And what the review of the report suggests is that there are still gaps in terms of accessing health information for people with sight loss. So it is still a big issue across Scotland.
The Scottish Government told me that visually impaired people were entitled to receive information in an accessible format of their choice. They also said that they wrote to all health boards last summer to remind them of their responsibility after the charter was tightened.
Hopefully from the launch of this report today and the publicity that's going around it, we will get more people aware of the need to make information accessible.
Ian Hamilton, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
The estimated cost of policing the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow later this year has risen to £250 million. The figure is detailed in a paper which will go before the Scottish Police Authority on Wednesday. Last month, Police Scotland Chief Constable Ian Livingston told the SPA the event had taken £200 million a year out of the core cost of policing. Around 30,000 people, including 200 world leaders, are expected to attend the COP26 summit in November. 2 online drug dealers have been ordered to pay back more than £500,000 of their profits. The Crown Office said Stuart Percival and James Powell were making money by selling the drugs known as novel psychoactive substances, which amounted to culpable and reckless conduct. A ban on these substances came into force across the UK in 2016. To rugby, and as Scotland get back to Six Nations action this weekend, their assistant head coach Mike Blair admits Saturday's match against Italy is a must-win. Scotland have lost their opening 2 matches in the campaign, and the players are now determined to prove a point in Rome. Here's Jane Lewis.
A united front at training as Scotland hope to get their Six Nations back on track, with the tournament resuming this weekend.
Italy is up next for Scotland, the team that Gregor Townsend faced in his very first match in charge of the national side. They won on that day and on the 2 other occasions they've met under Townsend. It's fair to say the pressure is on for that winning record to continue. Do you concede that this one on Saturday is a must-win?
Yeah, I think it's a must-win. We've shown some positives in the first couple of games, but it's not about how you play. It's winning games. So we've shown improvement, but we need to get one over the line and put some pressure on a really good Italian team.
And here's why Scotland are desperate for a win. After losing their opening 2 Six Nations matches, they sit 5th in the Six Nations table, with Italy a place below. The Italians haven't won a Six Nations match since February 2015. Their last victory was against Scotland at Murrayfield, and some believe a repeat of that result could leave Gregor Townsend's position in jeopardy.
If they don't win, they're heading for a wooden spoon. On a personal level for Gregor Townsend, it's his most important game ever for Scotland. If he loses this, Scotland could be heading for a whitewash. Off the back of an early World Cup exit, he would deserve, to be fair, to get sacked at the end of the Six Nations.
A strong view, but it's a situation the players seem determined to avoid with victory in Rome.
We're out to kind of prove a point now, especially the fact that we've kind of come off the back of 2 games where we could have won, but people have kind of labelled it as kind of a typical result for us, kind of being almost there. But yeah, we're absolutely buzzing to get out and prove ourselves.
So a point to prove. Scotland's focus is now on Italy and kick-starting their Six Nations campaign. Jane Lewis, reporting Scotland.
Well, now let's go over to Rebecca and Martin to find out what's happening on the 9 on BBC Scotland tonight.
Hi there. Tonight we'll look at the death of presenter Caroline Flack. There are still so many unanswered questions. We'll be speaking to a psychologist who specialises in this field to discuss the growing pressures that society places on so many people.
The number of people with coronavirus is still climbing. We're going to hear from a virus expert about whether we're prepared for an outbreak here in Scotland.
And we find out about a new Guinness World Record set by a theatre group from Dunblane. See you at 9 o'clock.
Well, now Gillian's here with the weather. Gillian, it's all we've been talking about over the weekend, but have we seen the end of Dennis then?
Well, Storm Dennis is gone, but still plenty of rain in the forecast this week, unfortunately, and it's not what we need. Good evening to you. Yes, we had some heavy showers around today, black skies looming over Mallaig earlier, but head further east. Picture postcard stuff from one of our weather watchers on the Murray coast, although looking at those leaves, I think it's safe to say it was blowing a hoolie despite the sun. And it's going to stay windy tonight, those winds driving in a rash of showers. You can see them on the radar image from earlier today, and they'll continue tonight. As it turns colder, those showers will turn increasingly wintry and our thoughts turn to snow and ice. Yellow warnings in these areas from the Met Office, but pretty much anywhere could see some icy conditions tonight. Those showers will keep coming, banding together for a time in parts of western and southern Scotland. They'll be heavy, a risk of hail and thunder, and the freezing level will come down tonight. So wintriness not just confined to the hills, but affecting higher ground. Above a couple of 100 metres, we could see a slight covering of snow. And as those temperatures get down close to freezing, if not slightly below, that will give us that risk of ice taking us into tomorrow. And the winds still strong, so there'll be some blowing around of that snow. All in all, some tricky conditions to start the day tomorrow, especially in those yellow warning areas. It'll be a day once again of sunny spells, but also some heavy showers. And like today, those showers will be most frequent in the west. And you can see here, this is a snapshot around about 3 o'clock, the bright greens indicating some heavy downpours. There'll be some wintriness over the high ground. Also like today, the best of the sunshine will be in the northeast towards the Murray coast and across Aberdeenshire, though still temperatures just 7 Celsius at best. A colder feel tomorrow, and especially when you factor in those fresh to strong west-southwesterly winds. Those winds will bring in frequent showers to the Northern Isles as well. As we head through the afternoon and towards the evening, still plenty of showers at first, but they'll tend to become fewer in number, and that's because we're going to see a brief ridge of high pressure tomorrow night ahead of this frontal system, a transient ridge. It doesn't last very long, but it means we'll start the day on Wednesday with plenty of dry weather, some brightness. Then we'll see that cloud spilling in, a band of rain that will be persistent and heavy, some snow for the hills, and of course more rain is certainly not what we need, especially with river levels already high. We head into Thursday, there goes that rain. It pulls away eastwards, some sunshine to follow, but also some heavy showers, especially in the west. They'll be wintry on the hills, and it's another windy one. That's the forecast. Laura.
Oh dear, thanks Gillian. Now, a reminder of tonight's main news. The clean-up operation is continuing in a Borders village badly hit by flooding during Storm Dennis. About 80 houses in Newcastleton were affected as the worst of the conditions swept through late on Saturday. The First Minister has visited Hawick to meet people affected by the severe weather and flooding there. And Nicola Sturgeon has reshuffled her cabinet and appointed Kate Forbes as Finance Secretary following the resignation of Derek Mackay. The 29-year-old became the first woman to set out a budget at Holyrood or Westminster earlier this month. Fiona Hislop takes on extra responsibility for the economy, while Jenny Gilruth has joined the government as Europe Minister. And the UK government is considering flying home 74 British passengers and crew on board a cruise liner that's been quarantined off Japan because of the coronavirus outbreak. Ministers have also booked out a hotel at Heathrow for anyone returning thought to be at risk of infection. And that is Reporting Scotland for this evening. I will be back with the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from everyone here, do have a very good evening. Good night.